Noam Chomsky is a suspect in the letters of Gail Carolyn Burstyn that arrived when I was kidnapped and tortured as a 12, 13-year-old. And the reasons I will um, express somewhat in an introductory sense, meaning as someone who's fond of the truth and wants to explore what happened, might take a little further in my observations. That no one has bothered is interesting. One of the key facts is that Noam Chomsky refuses to respond to petitions that he respond to the, what the letters contain, what they mean. He has refused for decades. Another factor is that years before they arrived, a few years before they arrived, when he was young and ascending to prominence as one of the robber barons of the left, he was schmoozing with Michael Foucault, who is now known to have been involved in the AIDS attack. Another factor that's very important to realize is that the victims themselves had an intellectual heritage that was occupied by things like David Bowie's culture and Brian Eno. And this is how Foucault sort of um, sniveled his way into espionage for a cultural mandate that brought the victims into cerebral deadlock of acceptance and various forms of language thrills provided by issues of mortification, for example. Foucault was a suicide pilot in the matter, and he gave them the extra buzz of being intellectually vibrant victims of this disaster. So sadistic was his mindset that none of them tried to save anyone else. They cruelly dismissed my attempts to intervene on their behalf and warn. They went along with their own assassins because they imagined and placed themselves in the Ivy League circuit of the esoteric. Places like UW Dialectical flourished into hybrid combat of this sort that poached several Kennedys when the same monstrosity struck again with COVID. Of course, we know now they're claiming flame over Africa grounds. The climate change was clocked to the depopulation, they say necessity. These were people who completely rejected ecology during their long careers, like the Beatles did. They completely rejected any attempt to be involved in ending hunger. They derided their own shiftless representations of idealism when they fell by the wayside. That's in the concert for Bangladesh. And they glorified themselves as God's emissaries on earth. Naturally, it's unsurprising when you follow the logic that they did and behaved and pulled what they did and behaved and pulled, behaved like and pulled. Another factor that doesn't take a crystal ball to understand, although crystal balls were used a lot by this gang and continue to be used a lot by this gang, doesn't take a crystal ball to notice that many of the letters came from Woods Hole, Massachusetts, from where Noam Chomsky publishes frequently in Z magazine. where the assassins made a special point of bringing JFK Jr.'s plane down. It doesn't take a crystal ball to see that the robber barons of the left have forged an alliance through their crystal balls with the extreme right wing to close ranks and make sure that not a word of warning goes out, not to the elders and not to the people younger than them who they took as souvenirs to hell. One of the wise outs of this perpetrator group in the city of Pittsburgh, a character from Harvard associated with Martin Andelman of Wells Fargo, maugred with great historic verve that Romans were fond of taking a child and buggering him while tutoring him and learning him. That's what the Beatles did to an entire generation. They took our children and buggered them to death. And UW Dialectical was shrewd enough to cleanse the language so that the assassins themselves, the exterminators themselves, can come and say, tisk, 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 we don't talk that way, with more poisons to play with as they tutored those they buggered to death. I think it's an outstanding question mark in academic affairs that Noam Chomsky would stand by and watch this as though it had never happened. Himself, while braying that media is more totalitarian than it ever has been in the United States of America, remains silent. And I must add, it seems to me it's the silence of a very caustic and complicit sort of man.